welcome back to our Bible in a Year reading plan. I am Shanique, and guess what, guys? We are on day 31. It has been 31 days in God's Word. Praise the Lord. You guys did a fabulous job. I'm so proud of you guys. And if we did it for 31 days, we can continue for the remainder of the year. Awesome. So today we are going to be reading from Leviticus chapter 11 to chapter 13. Now, if you're new here, I want to encourage you just to hit that subscribe button so you get notified whenever we release a new video. Currently, we're reading from Genesis to Revelation in a year, and you can find the reading plan that we're using in the description box below. All right, so we're going to be reading from the New American Standard Bible. But before we do that, we just want to continue a little bit, just giving you guys some insights on Leviticus, right? So yesterday we looked at the burnt offering. So today we're going to move on and we're going to talk a little bit about the grain offering. Okay, so although the grain offering did not require any blood, it represented another kind of sacrifice. And that is basically just giving up something of value for somebody else's benefit, right? Because a small portion of the grain offering was burnt on the altar, but the remainder, it went to the priest for food in the form of baked loaves or cooked or grilled grain, okay? I want you guys to also notice that the grain offering was given entirely to God, but it also benefited the priest. So throughout the book of Leviticus, the reader is reminded that it is his or her responsibility to care for the leaders in the church. So by giving to our pastors, right, what they and their families need, we're giving to God in essence, right? So the priests received the food not only from the grain offering, but also from the fellowship, sin, and guilt offerings. They even received the hide from the burnt offering, which could be sold or used for clothing. In fact, the more that people loved and appreciated God, the more they brought offerings, and that provided for the practical needs of the leaders of their church. Okay? Today, we are divided around all different things: race, politics, vaccination status. Even in the Garden of Eden, there was division with Adam and Eve after the fall, right? They attacked each other. Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the snake. So we see a reason to have a peace offering, right? Now, the name for the peace or fellowship offering is related to the Hebrew word shalom, which basically means peace or well-being. And you can find this in Leviticus 3 and 7. This offering, it's a reminder to live in peace and fellowship with one another. Now, the fellowship offering was the only one that allowed the offerer to eat part of the sacrifice. So the offerer, out of thanksgiving or because of a vow, brought a sacrifice to the temple, and it was divided into 3 ways. God received the fat burned on the altar, the priest received the breast and shoulder, and the offerer received whatever was left. Now, the offerer shared this meal with their family and with others connected to the household at God's appointed place near the tabernacle. And this shared meal was a time of rejoicing, for it celebrated a close connection with God and a tight fellowship with one another. And God deeply values fellowship and peace among his people, right? Now, of all the offerings in Leviticus, the peace offering is the only one for which instructions contains no promise of forgiveness or atonement. It mentions nothing about sin, right? Now, this offering is a testimony of God's desire for a personal connection with us. The whole ceremony is a divine invitation to be in close communication with God. Okay, so those are the 2 offerings that we're going to look at today, the grain offering and the peace offering. And with that being said, let's dive into today's reading. We're going to be reading from Leviticus 11 to 13 from the New American Standard Bible. Leviticus 11. The Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, These are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth. Whatever has a divided hoof, showing split hoofs, and chews the cud among the animals, that you may eat. Nevertheless, you are not to eat of these among those which chew the cud, or among those which have a divided hoof. The camel, for though it chews cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean to you. Likewise, the rock hyrax, for though it chews cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean to you. The rabbit also, for though it chews cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean to you. And the pig, for though it has a divided hoof, and so it shows a split hoof, it does not chew cud. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat any of these flesh or touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. These you may eat of whatever is in the water. Everything that has fins and scales in the water, in the seas or in the rivers, you may eat. But whatever is in the seas and in the rivers that does not have fins and scales, among all the teeming life of the water, and among all the living creatures that are in the water, they are detestable things to you, and they shall be detestable to you. You may not eat any of their flesh, and you shall detest their carcasses. Whatever is in the water does not have fins and scales, is detestable to you. Moreover, these you shall detest among the birds. They are detestable, not to be eaten: the eagle, the vulture, and the buzzard, the red kite, the falcon in its kind, every raven in its kind, the ostrich, the owl, the seagull, and the hawk in its kind, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron in its kinds, the hoopoe, and the bat. All the winged insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. Yet these you may eat among all the winged insects that walk on all fours, those which have jointed legs above their feet with which to jump on the earth. Those of them you may eat: the locust in its kinds, the devastating locust in its kinds, the crickets in its kinds, and the grasshopper in its kinds. But all other winged insects which are four-footed are detestable to you. By these, moreover, you will be made unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses becomes unclean until evening, and whoever picks up any of their carcasses shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. As for all the animals which have a divided hoof, but do not show a split hoof, or do not chew the cud, they are unclean to you. Whoever touches them becomes unclean. Also, whatever walks on its paws among all the creatures that walk on all fours are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcasses becomes unclean until evening, and the one who picks up their carcasses shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. They are unclean to you. Now these are to you the unclean among the swarming things which swarm in the earth: the mole, the mouse, and the great lizard in its kinds, the gecko, the crocodile, the lizard, the sand reptile, and the chameleon. These are to you the unclean among all the swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead becomes unclean until evening. Also, anything on which one of them may fall when they are dead becomes unclean, including any wooden article or clothing, or a hide or a snack, any article of which use is made. It shall be put in the water and be unclean until evening, then it becomes clean. As for any earthenware vessel into which one of them may fall, whatever is in it becomes unclean, and you shall break the vessel. Any of the food which may be eaten on which water comes shall become unclean, and any liquid which may be drunk in every vessel shall become unclean. Moreover, everything on which part of their carcass may fall becomes unclean. An oven or a stove shall be smashed. They are unclean and shall continue as unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern collecting water shall be clean, though the one who touches their carcass shall be unclean. Now, if a part of their carcass falls on any seed for sowing which is to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed and a part of their carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. Also, if one of the animals dies which you have for food, the one who touches its carcass becomes unclean until evening. He too eats some of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And the one who picks up its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Now every swarming thing that swarms on the earth is detestable, not to be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, and whatever walks on all fours, whatever has many feet, in regard to every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, because they are detestable. Do not make yourselves detestable through any of the swarming things that swarm, and you shall not make yourselves unclean with them, so that you become unclean. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, because I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. So you shall be holy, because I am holy. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird, and every living thing that moves in the waters, and everything that swarms on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten. Leviticus 12. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, When a woman gives birth and delivers a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days, as she is in the days of her menstruation. She shall be unclean. Then on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised, and she shall stay at home in her condition of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are completed. But if she gives birth to a female child, then she shall be clean for 2 weeks as in her menstruation, and she shall stay at home in her condition of blood purification for 66 days. When the days of her purification are completed, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering. Then he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is the law for who gives birth to a child, whether a male or a female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, the one as a burnt offering and the other as a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Leviticus 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When someone has on the skin of his body a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priests. The priest shall look at the infected area on the skin of the body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the person who has the infection for 7 days. Then the priest shall look at him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the infection has not changed and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. The priest shall then look at him again on the 7th day, and if the infected area has faded and infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a rash, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the rash spreads further on the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if the rash has spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the infection of the leprosy is on someone, then he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall then look, and if there is a white swelling on the skin and it has turned the hair white, and there is new raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. If the leprosy breaks out further on the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of the person who has the infection, from his head even to his feet, as far as the priest can see, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the leprosy has covered his entire body, he shall pronounce the one who has the infection clean. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall look at the raw flesh, and he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh turns back and is changed to white, then he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall look at him, and behold, if the infected area has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce the one who has the infection clean. He is clean. Now, when the body has a boil on its skin and it's healed, and in the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a reddish white bright spot, then it shall be shown to the priest, and the priest shall look, and behold, if it appears to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the infection of the leprosy. It has broken out in the boil. But if the priest looks at it, and behold, there are no white hairs in it, and it is not deeper than the skin, and is faded, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And if it spreads further on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection. But if the bright spot remains in its place and does not spread, it is only the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body sustains in its skin a burn by fire, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall look at it. And if the hair in the bright spot has turned white and it appears to be deeper than skin, it is leprosy. It has broken out in the burn. Therefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection of leprosy. But if the priest looks at it, and indeed there is no white hair in the bright spot, and it is no deeper than the skin, but is dim, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And the priest shall look at him on the seventh day. If it spreads further in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection of leprosy. But if the bright spot remains in its place and has not spread in the skin, but it's dim, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is only the scar of the burn. Now, if a man or woman has an infection on the head or on the beard, then the priest shall look at the infection, and if it appears to be deeper than the skin, and there is a thin yellowish hair in it, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scale. It is leprosy of the head or of the beard. But if the priest looks at the infection of the scale, and indeed it appears to be no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the person with the scale infection for 7 days. And on the seventh day, the priest shall look at the infection. And if the scale has not spread and no yellowish hair has grown in it, and the appearance of the scale is no deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself. But he shall not shave the scale, and the priest shall isolate the person with the scale for 7 more days. Now, on the seventh day, the priest shall look at the scale, and the scale has not spread in the skin, and it appears to be no deeper than the skin. The priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale spreads further in the skin after its cleansing, then the priest shall look at him, and if the scale has spread on the skin, the priest need not look for the yellowish hair, he is unclean. If in it slight scale has remained, however, and black hair has grown in it, and the scale has healed, and he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and if the bright spots on the skin of their bodies are a faint white, it is eczema that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. Now, if a man loses the hair of his head, he is only bald. He is clean. And if his head becomes bald at the front and sides, he is bald on the forehead, he is clean. But if on the bald head or the bald forehead there occurs a reddish white infection, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or on his bald forehead. Then the priest shall look at him, and if the swelling of the infection is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, like the appearance of leprosy in the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. He is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean. His infection is on his head. As for the person who has a leprous infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered, and he shall cover his mustache and call out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. He shall live outside the camp. When a garment has a mark of leprosy in it, whether it is a wool garment or a linen garment, whether in warp or woof or linen or of wool, whether in leather or in any article made of leather, if the mark is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, whether in the warp or in the woof or in any article of leather, it is a leprous mark, and it shall be shown to the priest. Then the priest shall look at the mark and shall quarantine the article with the mark for 7 days. He shall then look at the mark on the seventh day. If the mark has spread in the garment, whether in the warp or in the woof or in the leather, whatever the purpose for which the leather is used, the mark is a leprous malignancy. It is unclean. So he shall burn the garment, whether it is the warp or the woof, in wool or in linen or any article of leather in which the mark occurs, for it is a leprous malignancy. It shall be burnt in the fire. But if the priest looks and indeed the mark has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in any article of leather, then the priest shall order them to wash the thing in which the mark occurs, and he shall quarantine it for 7 more days. And the article with the mark has been washed, the priest shall again look, and if the mark has not changed appearance, even if the mark has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire, whether an eating away has produced bareness on the back or on the front of it. But if the priest looks and indeed the mark has faded after it has been washed, then he shall tear it out of the garment or out of the leather, whether from the warp or from the woof. Yet if it appears again in the garment, whether in the warp or in the woof, or in any article of leather, it is an outbreak. The leather with the mark shall be burnt in the fire. But the garment, whether the warp or the woof or any article of leather from which the mark has disappeared, when he washed it, shall then be washed a second time and will be clean. This is the law for the mark of leprosy in a garment of wool or linen, whether in the warp or in the woof or in any article of leather, for pronouncing it clean or unclean. Okay, that is our reading for today. Leviticus chapters 11 to 13. All right, so that is it for January with our Bible in a Year reading plan. I hope you'll join us again for February as we dive into other books of the Bible, reading from Genesis to Revelation in a year. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow for day number 32 in our Bible in a Year reading plan.